Okay, so we were talking about the kind of microstructures that one could expect in a material that has crept in the viscous glide creep regime. So, we were talking about how the microstructure would consist of a lot of random dislocations, no particular configurations of dislocations as you would expect in a dislocation climb control regime. So, talking of dislocation climb control regime, this is the kind of behavior that one would expect in a creep regime known as the power law creep regime. So, the power law creep regime is signified by a stress exponent which varies in the range of 4 to 7. So, materials which usually experience a power law creep they tend to provide stress exponent values in the range of 4 to 7. Now, we were talking about two types of alloys earlier. I was talking about class A alloys and then class M alloys. Now, class A alloys is what we dealt with in the viscous glide creep regime. So, where the dislocation glide is actually the rate controlling step, and in class M alloys, which is what we are talking now, here the dislocation climb is the rate controlling step, and the stress exponent values of 4 to 7 is a characteristic of class M alloys. So, I already mentioned it is dislocation controlled by dislocation climb. Now, the activation energy for deformation in materials which creep under power law creep regime is this deformation proceeds by activation energy equal to that of lattice self diffusion. And another interesting aspect of this regime is this is a grain size. So, when you have materials creeping in the power law creep regime, you do not see any grain size dependence, that means P is equal to 0. So, if you contrast this with what we learned about Nabarro-Haring creep and Coble creep, Nabarro-Haring you saw P is equal to 2, Coble creep you saw P is equal to 3, in grain boundary sliding we saw P is equal to 2, and in power law creep there is no grain size dependence. So, P is equal to 0. Now, power law creep we have n is equal to 4 to 7, and there have been different models which people have proposed to explain the material behavior in power law creep regime. These models also provide equations or correlations for the strain rate of deformation and its dependence on the applied stress and temperature and things like that. So, some of the different models are listed here. One of the first models to be proposed to explain power law creep is the Wiertmann's model. So, the Wiertmann's model basically consists of this model, basically the whole concept is about you have a source of dislocations, the source emits dislocations, these dislocations glide along the slip plane, they travel large distances, and during the motion of the dislocations plastic strain is generated. Now, whenever this dislocation come across any barriers, as an example is like long range stresses acting on the dislocations, long range stresses coming from other dislocations or networks of dislocations. So, in those cases the dislocations find it difficult to move further, and at that point of time the dislocations would start climbing in order to move up the barrier and probably meet the dislocations on the other slip plane, annihilate each other or continue with their motion. So, in this model, the Wiertmann's model, the climb motion controls the average dislocation velocity. So, you have two steps, you have a glide step as well as climb step, and what people have noticed or Wiertmann's proposal is that the climb step is what is the rate controlling step, and it actually influences the average dislocation velocity involved during creep. Another model is the Barrett and Nix jogged screw dislocation model. This model is also used to explain power law creep. So, in the jogged screw model, the model basically looks at non-conservative motion of the edge jog on a screw dislocation. So, if you recall, we were talking about edge jogs and kinks in dislocations, and one of the breaks in dislocations which we consider very important from a plastic deformation point of view is edge jogs on screw dislocations. Now, edge jogs and screw dislocations are important because the edge jogs will not glide along with the screw dislocation, they actually, because the Burgers vector is lying out of the slip plane. So, the Burgers vector for the edge dislocation is lying out of the slip plane. So, the only way the screw dislocation with an edge jog would move is by non-conservative motion. So, the screw dislocation has to drag the edge dislocation along with it, and so dislocation climb is basically involved in the process. So, Barrett and Nix suggested that when you have screw dislocation with edge jogs, then the motion of these at high temperatures can also lead to a stress exponent in the range of 4 to 7. Another model that has been proposed is by Ivanov and Anushkevich, and this model basically considers the climb of dislocations at subgrain boundaries. So, Ivanov and Anushkevich said that the presence of subgrain boundaries acts as barriers to dislocation motion, and in their model they said the climb of dislocations at the subgrain boundaries is what would determine the stress exponent, and this is what would generally give you a stress exponent in the range of 4 to 7. So, a review of these different models has been provided by Kastner and Perez Prado in their review article in Progress in Material Science, and I would encourage you to go through this article to get an understanding, a more detailed understanding of these different models. Having said that, in this particular lecture I am going to take you a little bit into the detail of the Vietman's derivation for the stress exponent using model, and then I am also going to talk in some detail about the Barrett and Nix jogged screw model. So, first the Vietman's model. So, here Vietman's model was the first model that was developed to explain the observation of a stress exponent in the range of 4 to 7. So, Vietman model is as follows. So, you have a dislocation source. So, this cross actually indicates a dislocation source and it is emitting some edge dislocation. So, dislocation source is a Frank Reed source, basically you can say a Frank Reed source emitting dislocations. So, these dislocations glide along their slip plane till they encounter a barrier. An example of a barrier is a Laumer-Cottrell barrier. So, this is an example of a barrier to dislocation motion. So, now further emission of dislocation. So, the moment this is as you can recall from our previous portions, when a dislocation encounters a barrier and if the dislocations continue to pile up at the barrier, there is going to be a back stress acting, and this back stress will prevent further emission of dislocation. So, for creep deformation to continue, this barrier has to be overcome in some form. So, the overcoming of this barrier can happen by dislocation climb. So, Vietman basically used this concept and he derived equations and arrived at the correlation between strain rate and stress using that. So, from here on I will be talking about the Vietman model and how he has derived the equations. So, we are assuming a source of dislocations. Assume a dislocation source. So, here it is a Frank Reed source emitting dislocations and we are talking of edge dislocations. The barriers to the edge dislocations is Laumer-Cottrell barrier. So, the height of the barrier is equal to h, and the distance and the dislocations have to climb to overcome this barrier. The distance the dislocations move before they encounter the barrier is L. So, it is basically the distance along the glide or the slip plane. So, that is the distance the dislocations move before they encounter the barrier. Now, the total creep strain is a result of the glide plus climb event. So, you have two events here, one is the glide event and one is the climb event. So, the total creep strain or creep deformation is a result of this. So, here what you will learn during the process of the derivation is that the glide event actually determines the extent of the plastic deformation and the climb event determines the strain rate of the plastic deformation. So, now let us say that the total shear strain coming out of this which is a result, a total shear strain which is a result of this glide plus climb event will have, let us call it the total shear strain at delta gamma. So, delta gamma will be strain during glide plus strain during climb. So, these are the two terms that will come about. So, we will call delta gamma g as strain during glide and delta gamma c is equal to strain during climb. So, the strain generated, the strain due to climb is lower than the, significantly lower than the strain due to glide. So, therefore, delta gamma which we originally started by saying delta gamma g plus delta gamma c can be approximated as delta gamma g. Now, delta gamma g is a result of the dislocations moving along the glide plane, and so delta gamma g can be written as rho b l. So, rho is dislocation density, b is Burger's vector, and L is the distance the dislocations have, which I already mentioned. L is the distance from the source to the barrier. So, it is basically the distance the dislocations have glided. Now, the total time of the glide plus climb event can be written as T is equal to T g plus T c. T g is the time for glide and T c is the time for climb. Now, what has been observed or what Weertman proposed is the time for climb is going to be significantly larger than the time for glide. So, T can be approximated as T is equal to T c, and T c can be written. So, T is approximately equal to T c, which can be written as the height of the barrier divided by the velocity of the dislocation during dislocation climb. So, V c is equal to the climb velocity. So, which means the shear strain rate is going to be delta gamma over T. So, that will be equal to delta gamma g over T c. So, that is equal to rho b l divided by h over V c. So, the shear strain rate gamma dot is equal to rho l over h into V c. So, that is the relation he got for the shear strain rate as a function of the climb velocity. Now, Weertman further said that the climb velocity V c is proportional to the vacancy concentration, the gradient in the climb velocity is proportional to the vacancy concentration times the effect of the activation energy. So, since the climb so dislocation climb requires a flux of vacancies. So, if the dislocation is climbing up, so you need vacancies to go to the dislocation. If you if the dislocation is climbing down, a positive edge dislocation I mean, then you have vacancies moving away from the dislocation core. So, in either case the flux, there is a flux of vacancies, and this flux of vacancies depends on the concentration gradient, which is basically the equilibrium vacancy concentration minus the vacancy concentration available at the dislocation region. So, there is, so the climb velocity is dependent on this gradient of concentration of vacancies. So, here E m is the activation energy for vacancy migration, delta C V is the concentration gradient of vacancies helping the dislocation climb process. So, delta C V was can be written as C V plus minus C V minus. So, if you recall, it is a similar concept that we used in the derivation of the Nabarro-Haring creep equation. So, in the presence of a stress, in the presence of a tensile stress, you will have excess of vacancies. In the presence of a compressive stress, you will have a reduction in the concentration of vacancies. So, this is a similar concept was used by Nabarro, so by Wiertman. So, he said C V plus can be written as C V e to the power sigma v over k T, and C V minus will be written as C V naught e to the power minus sigma v over k T. So, delta C V will be then C V naught into 2 sin h sigma v over k T. So, this is the influence of the stress, applied stress, and the what it basically says is that in the presence of a stress, the climb velocity is going to be influenced. So, now if we include this into the shear strain rate equation, so then gamma dot will eventually turn out as rho b L by h C V naught e to the power minus E m over k T into sin h 2 sin h into sigma v over k T. So, we can use a constant say A. So, it is a gamma dot will become basically a constant A into all this. So, your creep strain rate is another constant k into the shear strain rate. So, basically epsilon dot will become say another constant E A 1 into rho b L over h into C V naught e to the power E m over k T into sigma v over k T. So, sigma v over k T comes from at low stresses sin h sigma v over k T becomes sigma v so over k T. So, that is the assumption he made. So, then that becomes, so strain rate becomes, so A 1 into rho b L by h. So, this term he takes as d L. So, C V naught is basically the equilibrium concentration of vacancies. C V naught is e to the power E v over k T. So, E v is the activation energy for formation of vacancies. So, this term becomes d L into sigma v over k T. So, that is the strain rate. And then from Taylor's relation. So, if you recall in one of our earlier portions, I was talking about the relationship between dislocation density and applied stress. So, what people have noticed is the dislocation density is some constant times the applied square of the applied stress. So, he used the relation here, and so this equation then becomes epsilon dot is some constant A2 into L by H into dl into sigma cube. So, this is how the equation turns out to be, and if you see there is a dependence of sigma cube, epsilon dot is proportional to sigma cube. So, this is called the natural power law creep equation. So, this is what he derived from his relation. So, epsilon dot is equal to A2 L by H dl into sigma cube. Now, Wiertman also further showed that L by H can be approximately given as sigma to the power 1.5, and that makes epsilon dot is equal to A some constant A3 sigma to the power 4.5 into dl. So, sigma to the power 4.5. So, this now is known as the power law creep equation, and broadly or in general this is known as the 5 power law creep equation. So, this is the derivation of Wiertman. So, this is how the Wiertman model works, and how it eventually leads us to an equation where the strain rate is now dependent on sigma to the power 4.5 also, and it turns out that in general materials in the power law creep regime they can have values between 4 to 7. So, that was the Wiertman's equation. So, this relationship between strain rate and applied stress has been observed in a variety of materials, and this is here I am showing the relationship between normalized strain rate. So, this is normalized strain rate and this is normalized stress. So, a relationship between normalized strain rate and normalized stress, here you see n is equal to 4.5. This has been observed in aluminum of very high purity. So, this is a validation of the derivation that Wiertman carried out to arrive at the power law creep equation. Now, what kind of microstructures would you expect in the power law creep regime? Since this involves dislocation climb. So, the climb is what we are describing as the rate controlling step, and a little bit about why it is known as the rate controlling step. Well, the reason is the creep strain is happening because of dislocation glide, but for the creep strain to continue to happen you need climb to happen, so that the back stresses are relieved, and if the back stresses are not relieved then creep strain is not going to happen. That is the first aspect. So, the efficiency of the deformation, in a way if we call it as the efficiency of deformation, that is the efficiency of process is dependent on how fast the dislocation climb process happens. So, because it involves dislocation climb, so the kind of microstructures that people have observed is what I am showing here. So, generally for a material that has undergone creep by the power law creep regime, so the microstructure consists of well defined subgrains. So, you have subgrains forming within the material, and the boundaries are basically arrangement of dislocations. So, here is a TM micrograph of dislocations. So, these are all dislocations that have arranged themselves along this boundary. So, this boundary if you take magnify it further, so that is the kind of configurations that the dislocations develop. So, subgrains, so if you see subgrains in your material and with an n is equal to 4, then you can very easily say that it is a dislocation climb controlled creep. So, that is the one kind of microstructure, that is the kind of microstructure that one could see for a material crept in the n is equal to 4 to 7 region. Now, so this is the behavior of a class M alloy. So, class M alloy, so that is the kind of behavior that you would expect. Now, so now we have so far we have talked about the two types of alloy. So, we have talked about class A alloy and we have also talked about class M alloy. So, just to give you a summary of the characteristics of a class A and class type M type of alloy. So, class A there is very little or no primary creep, though this I had talked about in some detail. I have shown you some creep curves of material which was deforming in the n is equal to 3 regime, and of material that was deforming it n is equal to 4 to 7. So, if this is epsilon versus time. So, this is a kind of behavior. So, you have very little primary creep in class A. So, materials of class A type they show very little primary creep, whereas materials of class M they show a prominent primary creep. So, you see a prominent or large primary creep. Secondly, you do not see any subgrain formation in class A creep. So, I had shown you a few micrographs towards the end of the portion on viscous glide creep. So, I had said that you generally have random dislocations, you do not have any particular configuration of dislocation. So, you do not see any subgrain formation in class A creep, whereas in class M creep you see distinct subgrains forming within the material. So, subgrains is basically something like that. So, the grain has broken down into smaller grains. So, class A creep we understood that it is dislocation glide controlled creep, it is dislocation glide controlled creep because you have solute atmospheres around the dislocations which prevent easy motion of the dislocation. So, they prevent the dislocation from gliding easily along the slip plane. So, that is why it is dislocation glide, whereas in class M alloys we are talking about dislocation climb controlled creep. So, the creep deformation happens only if climb is happening properly. So, these are the differences. So, these three are the differences between the class A and class M alloys and the creep behavior, whereas the similarities between the two types of alloys is both class A alloys they are independent, the strain rate of deformation during creep is independent of grain size, and it is the same in class M alloys also. So, it is independent of grain size. And another similarity is that the dislocation density it follows the Taylor law. So, this rho is proportional to sigma square, and a similar thing is observed in class M alloys as well. So, you see rho is proportional to similar sigma square. So, these are the similarities between class A creep and class M creep. Okay. So, now we are going to talk about the second model. So, we spoke about the Wierthmann's model in detail. So, we said subgrain formation and we derived the equations. So, now we are going to talk about another model which was proposed by Barrett and Nix, and this is known as the Joget screw dislocation model, a model used for explaining the n is equal to 4 to 7 behavior. So, here in the Joget screw dislocation motion model, the steady state strain rate is dependent on the motion of the Joget screw dislocation. So, if you recall dislocation like that, and if the Burgers vector of the screw dislocation, and so it is perpendicular to the jog, and the jog prevents the easy motion of the screw dislocation. So, the only way the Joget screw dislocation moves is by non-conservative motion, and during so Barrett and Nix they used this aspect of the screw dislocation. So, they said the non-conservative motion would require a balance between the work done in moving forward the gliding portion of the screw dislocation against the chemical force required for generation or absorption of vacancies at the jogs. So, in dislocation climb, so when extra half plane of atoms has to climb. So, if the positive dislocation is moving up, so you basically have vacancies going and getting absorbed there. The other way of, if the dislocation is climbing down, so if the dislocation is climbing down, you need vacancies to move away from there. So, case 1 vacancy is moving towards the dislocation core, in case 2 vacancies moving away. So, either you have absorption of vacancies at the core, or you have generation of vacancies at the core, and both are necessary for the motion of the climb of the dislocation. So, this is a concept they used. So, they said you could have either absorption of vacancies at the jogs edge jogs. So, the jogs are edge character. So, you could have absorption of vacancies at the edge jogs, or you could have generation of vacancies or emission of vacancies from the edge jogs. So, they used this and they said there is a balance between the work done in moving the dislocation, a gliding portion of the dislocation, which is this is the gliding portion of the dislocation to move it forward, and this work done will be balanced by the chemical force required for the absorption or generation of vacancies. Now, they made a small assumption. They said let us assume all jogs are the vacancy generating type of jogs. So, if it is vacancy generating type of jogs, then the velocity of the dislocation will be given by the following equation. So, Vs is the overall screw dislocation velocity. So, it is the overall jogged screw dislocation velocity, it is the velocity of the jogged screw, and it is given by the following equation. So, here dl is the lattice diffusivity, h is the jog height, omega is the atomic volume, lambda is the jog spacing, and sigma is the applied stress, and k is Boltzmann's constant, T is temperature. So, if you have say a jog, so if you have edge jogs like that, so this will be the spacing between the jogs. So, another way of looking at it is, say a jog is impeding a dislocation from moving, screw dislocation. So, this will be the lambda. So, that is the jog spacing lambda is the jog spacing. Now, this is the equation that they came up with for the overall screw dislocation velocity, and then knowing that the strain rate of deformation is dependent on the velocity of the dislocation by the following equation. So, epsilon dot is equal to rho b Vs, and then the Taylor's law basically says the rho is proportional to sigma square. So, that is the dislocation relation between the dislocation density and applied stress. So, rho is proportional to sigma square, that is the Taylor's law. So, Barrett and Nix, instead of sigma square, they considered that rho is proportional to sigma cube. So, they employed that and used it in the equation rho b Vs. So, what they ended up with is the creep strain rate of deformation can then be given by the following equation. So, epsilon dot is equal to k sigma cube dl over h exponential of sigma omega lambda hkt minus 1. So, this is the equation that Barrett and Nix arrived at using the concept of motion of jogged screw dislocations. Now, the jogged screw dislocation, the characteristics of this model, the jogged screw model is as follows. So, it allows a stress exponent value of n is equal to 4 at low stresses. So, if your stress values are low, then e to the power sigma omega lambda by h over hkt will become approximately equal to sigma omega lambda by hkt. So, then your strain rate is essentially sigma cube proportional to into sigma some constant into dl. So, what you end up with is epsilon dot is proportional to sigma to the power 4. So, that is what is happening here. So, you get a stress exponent value of 4 for low stresses. Now, as the stress increases, the stress one of the other observations of this model is that the stress exponent will increase with increasing applied stresses. So, as the applied stress increases, you may not see e to the power it equal to, so you may gradually see a different relationship. So, gradually the stress exponent value could increase with increasing applied stress. And another observation is that the form of the curve between epsilon dot and sigma, the form of the curve between the strain rate and the applied stress would depend on the value of lambda, which is the spacing between the jogs. So, we may expect n is equal to 4 at certain stress ranges, but as I said, so epsilon dot versus sigma. So, the value may gradually change from n is equal to 4 to higher values, and the nature of the curve, the form of the curve may depend on this value of lambda. And one of the significant assumptions of the model is that the jog height is of atomic dimension. So, you are talking of a screw dislocation with a jog, and Barrett and Nix said the height of the jog h is roughly equal to atomic height. So, they said it can be taken as h is equal to b. So, you can approximately take h equal to b, b is the Burgers vector. So, that is the model assumption. So, how do you know if the material is creeping as per this model? So, how do you know whether you should use the Joget screw model for describing your creep data? Well, if you do TEM analysis of your scraped sample. So, say your material has scraped already, you took some samples, did a TEM analysis. So, if you see Joget screw dislocations like those shown here. So, this is like a screw segment with a jog, another. So, if you see something like that, then you can safely assume that the material is, so that you need the Joget screw model to describe your creep data. So, this is the work, this is data from this micrograph belongs to titanium aluminide, microstructure of titanium, gamma titanium aluminide, and work by Vishwanathan, Vasudevan and Mike Mills. So, the screw dislocations with the jogs, and that is the microstructure they got. So, they wanted to use this Joget screw model to explain their creep data. But very interestingly, so in that paper by Vishwanathan and Vasudevan and Mills, and subsequently there is a lot of work that Mills group carried out to investigate the Joget screw model in detail and its application to the creep behavior of titanium aluminides and subsequently alpha titanium alloys as well as zirconium alloys. So, what they found out is the basic equation of the Joget screw model was not suitable for explaining their or describing their experimental data. So, the squares here, so this is experimental creep data from gamma titanium aluminide. So, they saw Joget screw dislocations in the TEM micrograph. So, they thought they should use the Joget screw model to explain their creep data. So, they tried that. So, what happened was the Joget screw model with h is equal to b was not able to explain the data. So, the h is equal to Joget screw model was predicting strain rates which were at least 3 to 4 orders of magnitude higher than that they observed experimentally. So, this is the experimental data and this is the prediction of the Joget screw model with lambda is equal to 200 nanometer and the prediction of the Joget screw model with lambda is equal to 20 nanometer. So, you see at least, so I would say 10 to the power minus 2 is, say if this is 10 to the power minus 2 approximately and the data they have is 10 to the power minus 8. So, that order of magnitude is difference is 5 to 6. So, you have 5 to 6 orders of magnitude difference between the original Joget screw model which was by assuming a jog height of b and the experimental data. So, in order to understand this discrepancy, so they believed they had to use the Joget screw model because the microstructure was clearly showing a lot of Joget dislocations, screw dislocations, and what they found out was if they employed a jog height of 100 times the Burgers vector. So, jog height is equal to 100 times the Burgers vector, then for a jog spacing of approximately 20 nanometers and so 200 nanometers. So, jog spacing of approximately 200 nanometers and jog height of 100 times the Burgers vector, the model was able to describe the experimental data. Actually, what they found out was the entire data, creep data was working for a dislocation, a jog spacing in the range of 220 to 200 nanometers. So, this is the upper and the lower bound, this is the lower bound here and this is the upper bound. So, the experimental data that they obtained was in that range. So, what they realized is the equation that Barrett and Nix came up with would not work unless it was modified, and the modification they proposed was in this particular paper was the jog height can be several times higher than a single Burgers vector. So, for a jog height of around 100 times the Burgers vector, the data was being explained well by the Joget screw model. So, that was the modification they came out with, and subsequently now in support of this observation that the jog height is 100 times the Burgers vector. So, the TM data, they used the TM to show that through detailed TM investigations, Mills and co-workers showed that the jog heights need not be B, but can be significantly higher. They also, using TEM, they determined the dependence of dislocation density on applied stress and the dependence of average jog spacing on the applied stress. So, in addition to the fact that the jog height has to be several times the Burgers vector, they also decided to determine the dependence of dislocation density on the applied stress, because Barrett and Nix said the rho can be proportional to sigma cube, whereas traditionally people have been using sigma square. So, they, and there is also a constant alpha. So, essentially it is, so the constant involved on the dependence of dislocation density on applied stress. So, to understand that they use the TM, and they also the lambda value, the dependence of lambda on sigma was also had to be determined, and so they use the TM for doing that. Now, here is a TEM micrograph from a crept titanium aluminide sample, and so this is a Joget dislocation, and if you see, when by using some tilting experiments, they found out the height of the jog, or so this is the height of the jog, and if you can notice, it is definitely not a single Burgers vector, it is more than that. So, they employed the TM to understand that, and another example is shown here. So, you have another Joget dislocation, and clearly it is several times the Burgers vector. So, that is how their group came up with a rationale to explain the difference in the experimental creep rates versus the original Joget screw model. So, that was the two models, one was the Wiertmans model and the second one was the Joget screw model, and its modification and its usefulness for explaining creep strain rate data as a function of stress and temperature. Now, so power law creep we are understanding as something where the stress exponent is in the range of 4 to 7, but in certain cases you may get n greater than 7, but the material would still be creeping in the power law creep regime. Now, having said that, generally when the stress exponent values are very large, say greater than 7, then people say the power law has essentially broken down. So, the power law breakdown, there is another creep regime which is known as the power law creep regime, power law breakdown regime, PLB. So, when you see stress exponent values greater than 7, then you typically say that is breakdown of the power law, but in metal matrix composites you could see n greater than 7, but the material is still undergoing creep within the power law creep regime. So, how is this happening is, in metal matrix composites, because you have a secondary phase. So, say as an example aluminum and silicon carbide. So, you have a dispersion of silicon carbide precipitates, second phase silicon carbide within say aluminum matrix. So, the dislocations are now going to experience barriers to their motion from the dispersoids. So, you have these dispersoids which are going to, which are strengthening the material on account of the resistance they provide to the motion of the dislocations. Now, what researchers have found out is, when you have a case like this, when you have a metal matrix composite, these dispersoids are going to, you need a minimum threshold stress. So, when you have a situation like this, the stress that you are applying for creep to happen has to be higher than a threshold stress. So, let us call this threshold stress sigma naught. So, if your applied stress is greater than sigma naught, then you can explain the creep behavior of these metal matrix composites, and once you use the threshold stress to rationalize your creep data, what you will notice is the n value then comes within the 4 to 7 range that you understand is implying that you understand for power law creep. So, basically you have to invoke a threshold stress to rationalize your data, creep data, and once you do that, then you will be able to understand, then you will be able to get stress exponent values in the range of 4 to 7. Now for metal matrix composites with n greater than 7, typically the strain rate of deformation, say epsilon dot versus stress. So this is shear strain rate, which is gamma dot, but in general if you have epsilon dot versus stress, so the kind of creep behavior, the creep behavior will be like that. So you will see a curvature, you will see a curvature in your plot. So it is not typically, you are going typically for a material behaving in the power law creep regime, we are going to expect a linear line like that and with n in the range of 4 to 7, but for metal matrix composites during creep you may not see a straight line, but you may see something like that. So you may see a certain amount of curvature in the plot. So the equation that you should use, so the curvature like I mentioned can be rationalized by using a threshold stress, and the equation that you should use to describe the creep behavior of a metal matrix composites is given here. So you have the stress that is actually driving the creep is an effective stress, it is not the applied stress, but it is applied stress minus sigma naught. So the effective stress is equal to sigma minus sigma naught. Now one can find out this value of the sigma naught from the strain rate versus sigma plots. So from these plots one could find out the value of the sigma naught. So one simple approach that has been proposed by Lee and Langdon is a back extrapolation technique. So if sigma is very close to sigma naught, so we saw that epsilon dot is proportional to sigma minus sigma naught to the power n. So if applied stress, if your applied stress is closer to sigma naught, then your strain rate of deformation will tend towards 0, right. So if sigma is close to sigma naught, then epsilon dot is close to 0. So what Lee and Langdon said is, if you back extrapolate your creep curve, then at sigma close to sigma naught you will get strain rates which are so slow, so small, so that you can almost say that your strain rate of deformation is close to 0. So the idea of Lee and Langdon was back extrapolate, and wherever the curve intersects the x axis, so here x axis is tau, we could also say it as sigma. So wherever it intersects the x axis and assuming a strain rate of, considering strain rate of 10 to the power minus 10 as almost equal to 0, you can say that this stress corresponds to your threshold stress. So that is the approach they suggested for determination of the threshold stress. There are other approaches as well. There is a mathematical you could use these graphs for also determining the threshold stress, and there will be one numerical that we will do on this concept to understand the other approach for determining the threshold stress for these materials.